My name is Skyler. I'm 19 now, a psychology student in Seattle, and most days my life feels like an endless blur of textbooks, late-night coffee, and the constant hum of the city outside my dorm window. But tonight, as I sit here with the rain misting softly against the glass, something in the sound pulls me backward. The droplets slide down in crooked lines, like the way memories leak into the present when you least expect them. I find myself remembering. What comes back is not the laughter of a carefree childhood, not the warmth that people like to imagine when they speak of simpler times. What returns is a story shaped by pain, betrayal, and the shadows that lived in corners no one else seemed to notice. Yet, alongside that darkness, there were also people, rare, unexpected, who stretched out their hands and pulled me back from edges I didn't yet understand. I was only 9 years old then. A little girl with tangled hair and scraped knees, running through the narrow streets of a small town in Oregon. On the surface, it was the kind of place that dressed itself in smiles, where neighbors waved and secrets stayed hidden. But behind closed doors, truth twisted and soured. And I learned far too early that appearances lie. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. When I was 9, my life seemed ordinary enough to anyone looking in from the outside. Our little town in Oregon carried the rhythm of routine. Children pedaled their bikes down cracked sidewalks, neighbors trimmed their hedges on Saturday mornings, and gossip floated over back fences like smoke. I lived with my mother, Evelyn, 35 at the time, a quiet woman who wore her stress like an invisible coat. She worked as an accountant at the local bank, her world consumed by balance sheets and late-night calculations. I remember how she'd come home smelling faintly of ink and coffee, her shoulders already bowed before she even set down her purse. My stepfather, Marcus, was the opposite. 40, he had the kind of charm that could fill a room. A high school basketball coach, he wore his title man of the community like a crown. People admired his broad smile, his easy laugh, the way he slapped backs and remembered names. To others, Marcus was the definition of trustworthiness. To me, he was a storm that never stopped circling. He kept a secret that turned my bedroom into a prison. Camera, hidden carefully but deliberately, blinked its red eye in the corner of my ceiling. He told me it was to protect me from bad people outside, a gesture of love and vigilance. I was too young to question his words, too naive to understand that the real danger wasn't lurking on the street but living under the same roof. Even then, though, something in me recoiled. His explanations felt wrong, like a smile stretched too wide. That year, a new family moved into the house next door. Ethan was 38, a freelance photographer with a weathered camera slung around his neck and 2 little girls trailing close behind him. Lily was 7, a bundle of restless energy with hair always slipping from her braids, while Ava, just 5, clutched stuffed animals like shields against the world. The neighborhood wasted no time in labeling Ethan. Whispers spread quickly. He had lost custody of his children in a bitter divorce. His ex-wife accused him of things never spoken aloud but often implied. To the families who thrived on gossip, he was already guilty. Marcus, of course, led the charge. "Dangerous man," he declared loudly whenever Ethan's name surfaced. "You keep your kids away from him." But I watched Ethan carefully. His house was quiet, his girls giggling on the porch steps as he photographed sunsets and flowers through the fence. He kept his distance from the neighborhood children, never letting Lily or Ava wander far. The other kids ran toward him. He'd gently steer them back with a kind of urgency that puzzled me then. Looking back, I understand. He wasn't keeping children away out of malice. He was shielding them, protecting them from something, someone. 9, I couldn't articulate it. But I felt it in the heaviness of his silence, in the way his eyes seemed to recognize the fear in mine. The story begins. It started quietly, the way most nightmares do, not with screaming but with whispers. Marcus called them his nightly safety checks. The name alone sounded so official, so protective, that for a while I tried to believe him. After my mother fell asleep, I'd hear his footsteps in the hall, soft and deliberate. Creak of the floorboards outside my door became a signal my body knew before my mind did. Then the knob would turn slowly, like in a horror film, but no one else was awake to hear it. He would sit at the edge of my bed as though he belonged there, the mattress dipping under his weight, the smell of his aftershave sharp in the dark. His voice was low, almost soothing, as he spun stories about men like Ethan, the new neighbor. "You don't understand, Skyler," he'd murmur, leaning close. "There are predators out there. Men who look harmless. They're always watching little girls." At 9, I didn't have words for the dissonance I felt. The way his hand on my shoulder didn't match the gentle tone of his warnings. First, it was just a hand resting there, heavy and possessive. Then it began to slide down my back, the weight of it cold, like a snake curling closer. My body went rigid each time, yet I stayed silent, my lips pressed tight as though sound itself might trigger something worse. I tried to tell my mother. One evening, while she was folding laundry, I stood in the doorway and whispered, "Mom, Marcus comes into my room at night. He touches me." She didn't even look up. "Marcus loves you like his own," she said, her tone clipped with exhaustion. "Don't make up stories, Skyler. You have such an imagination." It was the moment I learned that silence can be safer than truth. Camera in my room, the one Marcus had mounted in the corner to protect me from outsiders, was always there, a small, unblinking red light. I told myself it was for safety, the way he said. But even at 9, some instinct told me it wasn't right. That it wasn't meant to guard me, but to capture me. One day, curiosity overcame fear. Marcus had been out coaching, my mother still at work. I crept into his study, the one that smelled faintly of beer and ink. In the second drawer of his desk, tucked beneath loose papers, was a small black notebook. Its pages were filled with his handwriting, neat, meticulous, and horrifying. Skyler wore the blue shirt today. Looked frightened when I entered the room. Good progress. I flipped to another page, my hands trembling. Resisted less tonight. Kept her eyes down. Must increase safety talks to reinforce trust. The words swam on the page, but their meaning hit me like ice water. He wasn't protecting me. He was studying me, documenting me as if I were an experiment. Safety record, he called it once when I'd seen him scribbling. Now I knew it for what it really was, a ledger of control. From that day forward, the camera in my room felt like a living thing, like a predator perched above my bed. I'd change clothes in the bathroom, move with my back to the corner. But there was no escaping Marcus's gaze. The breaking point. Everything snapped one afternoon while my mother was at work. The Marcus had been drinking. I could smell it on him long before he stumbled into the kitchen. His face was flushed, his smile loose in a way I had learned to fear. "Skyler," he called, his voice syrupy but sharp underneath. "Come help me in the garage." I hesitated. The garage was his space, tools hanging like weapons, the air smelling of oil and beer. But hesitation only made things worse. Slowly, I walked in. He shut the door behind me with a soft click. The sound echoed louder than any slam. "You're growing up so beautiful," he whispered, stepping closer. His breath was sour, his eyes glittering like shards of glass. "Do you know how hard it is for me to keep you safe?" His hand clamped down on my shoulder, fingers digging into the bone. I froze, my back against the cold wall. My voice died in my throat. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, frantic and loud. And then a voice cut through the moment. "Excuse me," someone said from the doorway. Calm, steady. "My cat's gone missing." Might it have slipped in here? It was Ethan. For a second, Marcus didn't move. Then his entire demeanor shifted like a mask sliding into place. He straightened, laughed, and smiled as though nothing had happened. "Oh, hey," he said, waving Ethan off. "No cats in here. You should check the bushes out back." But Ethan didn't leave. He stepped inside, scanning the floor as if looking for a tiny paw print. "She likes to hide," he murmured, moving closer, his eyes flicking once, just once, to me. It was enough. His presence cracked the spell. I bolted past Marcus, out of the garage, my legs carrying me before my mind caught up. That night, my mother and Marcus made me sit at the kitchen table. The overhead light was too bright, my chair too small. "Ethan is dangerous," Marcus said, his voice full of righteous indignation. "He's trying to destroy this family." My mother nodded, her face tight with worry. "Stay away from him, Skyler," she warned. "You're not to speak to him. Do you understand?" But I did not understand. Ethan had saved me. Days passed, but my resolve only hardened. One evening, while Marcus was at practice and my mother on a late shift, I saw Ethan in his yard, kneeling to adjust his camera. I slipped out the back door, heart pounding. He looked up as I approached, his expression soft but grave, like someone who'd been waiting for this moment. "I can't stay there anymore," I blurted, tears rising. "Marcus, he's doing terrible things." Ethan didn't look surprised. He didn't ask for proof. He just nodded, as though he'd known all along. "I've been watching him," he said quietly. "I have evidence." His words settled over me like a fragile net of safety. For the first time in years, someone believed me, and not just believed, but knew. Standing in the dim evening light, with the smell of damp grass and camera film between us, I realized something that would shape the rest of my life. Monsters thrive on secrecy, and survival begins with telling the truth to someone who will listen. From that moment, everything in my world began to shift. Ethan wasn't just the strange man next door anymore. He was the first adult to look me in the eye and acknowledge my fear. In that small, stolen conversation, a thread of hope wound itself around my heart. But I also knew Marcus. I knew his temper, his ability to turn every accusation back on me. I knew he'd sense a change in me soon. And when he did, there would be consequences. I didn't yet understand how far Ethan was willing to go or how much evidence he had gathered. I only knew I'd taken my first step out of the shadows. And Marcus, though he didn't know it yet, had just lost the first piece of his power. Trials and first failures. Ethan kept his word. A few days after our conversation, he took my trembling hand and led me to the police station. I remember the cold fluorescent lights, the heavy air of authority, and the way the officers looked up from their desks when we walked in. For a brief moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe finally someone would listen. I told them everything. Camera, the notebook, the safety checks. My voice shook, but the words poured out like water breaking through a dam. Ethan stood beside me, his jaw tight, his presence steady. But when I finished, silence filled the room. Then came the laughter, sharp, dismissive. One officer leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Marcus," he scoffed. "Coach Marcus? You expect us to believe that about him?" Another officer shook his head. "Sounds like this guy," he said, nodding at Ethan, "is putting ideas into your head. Dangerous ones. You're just a kid, Skyler. And he's got a history, doesn't he?" Their words crashed down like stones. I wanted to scream, to demand they look at the evidence Ethan had tried to present. But instead, they waved us off. One officer even leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "If you keep dragging Marcus's name through the mud, we'll have no choice but to press charges against you," he added, glaring at Ethan. By the time we walked out, my legs felt like lead. My hope had been crushed beneath the weight of loyalty and corruption. And things only got worse. When we returned home, my mother and Marcus were waiting in the living room. My mother's face was pale with fury, her hand trembling as she clutched a glass of water. The moment I stepped inside, she stood, and the crack of her palm against my cheek echoed louder than any words. "Do you want to destroy us?" She shouted. "Do you want to ruin Marcus's reputation? Do you know what you've done?" I couldn't speak. The shame burned hotter than the sting on my skin. That night, Marcus came into my room again. I will never write down the details, never give those memories more life than they already hold. But when he finally left, I curled into myself on the floor, wishing I could vanish into the cracks of the house. And then I ran. At midnight, barefoot and shaking, I slipped out the back door and sprinted to Ethan's house. My fists pounded on his door until it opened, and there he stood, exhausted but calm. Behind him, Lily and Ava peeked out, their faces pale. That's when I saw the bruises. Purple marks blooming across their arms, fading yellow around their necks. My stomach lurched. Fear surged up inside me. Was I wrong about him too? But then Lily stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. Her voice was small but steady. "Dad saved us," she whispered. "He saved us from Mom." Ethan's face hardened as he knelt beside us. He explained, voice low, that his ex-wife, consumed by alcohol and rage, had hurt the girls for years. He had documented everything, photographs, recordings, testimony. But because of a single shoplifting charge from his youth, the court had dismissed him, labeling him untrustworthy. I looked into his eyes then, and for the first time I saw not just sorrow but a mirror of my own, the pain of not being believed. Ethan's discovery. The days that followed were a blur of whispered conversations, restless nights, and the constant weight of fear pressing against my chest. Ethan spent hours at his desk, shuffling through papers, emails, and photographs like a man chasing shadows. He wasn't just trying to protect me anymore. He was digging, searching for the truth behind Marcus's carefully polished mask. And then he found it. One evening, under the dim light of his study lamp, Ethan pulled up an email he had received from an anonymous account. His face tightened as his eyes scanned the screen. "Skyler," he said, his voice low but urgent. "You need to see this." I stepped closer, heart pounding, and read the words. Marcus Henderson once came under investigation for inappropriate behavior with students at his previous school. Case was quietly buried. Connections. Influence. He always finds a way out. The email claimed to be from a former colleague of Marcus's, someone who had seen too much but couldn't speak openly. My stomach turned. The horror I lived with wasn't mine alone. Marcus had been using his role as coach to get close to children for years. And he had escaped justice, shielded by friends in high places and the loyalty of parents who adored the winning smile of their hero coach. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "This is bigger than we thought," he murmured. "If we use this, Marcus won't just come after me, he'll bring others with him." And he was right. Within days, Ethan's phone buzzed with threats. Messages from blocked numbers, "Stay out of it. We know where you live." Cars lingered outside his house at night, headlights cutting into the dark like knives. Groups of parents, those who believed Marcus could do no wrong, began whispering when Ethan passed, glaring as if he were the true danger. The noose of suspicion tightened around him, while Marcus's reputation kept him untouchable. The flight toward truth. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. The fear was eating me alive, and Ethan, despite everything, believed me when no one else would. One morning, he handed me a worn leather notebook. "Write it all down," he said gently. "Every detail. Don't let him erase your story." My hand shook so badly that the words tumbled out crooked, shaky, barely legible. But I wrote about the late-night safety checks, the camera, the notebook, the garage. Every memory I wanted to bury spilled onto those pages. By the time I was done, tears blurred the ink. That same morning, Marcus realized I wasn't home. His fists pounded on Ethan's front door, his voice echoing like thunder. "Where's Skyler?" he shouted. "She's my daughter. Bring her out right now, or I'll call the cops." Ethan opened the door calmly, his expression steady despite the storm outside. "Go ahead," he said evenly. "Call them. I have evidence." And Skyler's voice is finally on record. Marcus's face twisted with rage. For the first time, his mask cracked, and beneath the charm lay something feral. He turned to my mother, who stood behind him wringing her hands. "Do you see what he's doing? He's poisoning her against us." But before the shouting could escalate further, a figure appeared at the edge of the yard. Mrs. Helen, our 65-year-old neighbor. She walked with quiet dignity, her gray hair tied back neatly, her nurse's posture unshaken even in chaos. "Enough," she said firmly. "I've seen enough of this charade. Skyler, come with me." Her words startled everyone, but Helen had been watching Marcus for years. Now she stepped forward, revealing that she had already contacted her daughter Clara, a social worker who specialized in child protection. Clara wasn't alone. She was working with Judge Judith, a stern but fair woman known for standing against corruption. Ethan's eyes flickered with relief. The net was tightening, but it wasn't around us anymore. The orchestrated chaos. Still, Marcus was a man who thrived on control. He wouldn't let me slip away without a fight. He grabbed my wrist, pulling me back toward the house. "You're coming home," he snarled. My mother's voice rose shrill behind him. "Skyler, stop this nonsense. You're destroying our family." But in that very moment, an alarm pierced the neighborhood air. Smoke billowed from the house across the street, an electrical fire, sudden and sharp. Neighbors poured out in panic, rushing to evacuate. Amid the chaos, Ethan bent down to me, whispering, "Go now." Later, I would learn he had anticipated something like this, hinting at a faulty wire to a neighbor earlier that week. It wasn't arson, not exactly, but a spark at the right moment had created a diversion. And in that chaos, I ran. Through the smoke, past the crowd, until I reached Helen's porch. Clara was there, holding a folder thick with documents, her face composed but urgent. Beside her stood Judge Judith, robes replaced with a plain coat, but authority radiating from her. "Skyler," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "You're safe now." She held up the papers, an emergency protection order signed and sealed. Marcus burst from the smoke moments later, my mother at his side. His face was crimson, his fury unchecked. "This is kidnapping," he roared, lunging forward. But Judge Judith stepped between us, raising her hand. "Not another step, Mr. Henderson. You are under investigation for child abuse and obstruction of justice. You'll speak only in court from now on." Behind her, the flashing lights of state police cars filled the street. Officers stepped out, their expressions cold and professional. They weren't the small-town cops who had once laughed in our faces. These were state investigators, armed with warrants and unshaken by Marcus's reputation. The officers moved quickly, cuffing Marcus as he spat curses and threats. They pulled evidence from Ethan's files, the anonymous email, and, most damning of all, the notebook Marcus had kept, which Ethan had secretly photographed when I first found it. The charges mounted: child abuse, possession of illicit recordings, falsifying evidence to frame Ethan. For the first time in years, Marcus had no smile to hide behind. Victory in the shadows. As the police car doors slammed shut, I stood trembling, not from fear this time, but from release. The nightmare that had defined my childhood was no longer hidden. My voice, once dismissed, had been heard. Ethan placed a steady hand on my shoulder. His daughters, Lily and Ava, clung to him, their small faces lit with cautious hope. Helen stood beside us, her eyes soft, a silent guardian who had been watching all along. Clara gathered the papers with quiet efficiency, while Judge Judith gave me a nod of recognition, as if to say, "You fought. You endured. And you won." It didn't feel like victory yet. My heart still carried the scars, and I knew healing would take years. But in that moment, as the red and blue lights faded into the night, I allowed myself to breathe for the first time. The nightmare was over. Or at least the first chapter of it was. The end of my story is not a tragic closing chapter, but the beginning of a different life. When Marcus was sentenced to 20 years in prison, the shadow that had haunted me every night finally disappeared. Justice, though delayed, had come. My mother, who had chosen silence and complicity instead of protection, received a suspended sentence of 2 years and lost custody rights. For me, that meant freedom from a house filled with fear. I was taken in by the foster family, an elderly couple living in the quiet suburbs of Seattle. Their home wasn't grand, but it had a lavender garden that filled the air with peace every evening. For the first time, I felt what the word safe really meant. I was no longer the child trapped in secrecy. I was a survivor who had a chance to grow without chains. Ethan, after years of slander and painful battles in court, finally regained custody of Lily and Ava. His tears in the courtroom the day the ruling came down were not of weakness, but of relief. He had fought for the truth when no one believed him. In doing so, he had not only saved his daughters but also me. Together, we became something unusual, a family not tied by blood but bound by scars, trust, and courage. And then there was Mrs. Helen, the retired nurse who had always watched quietly from her porch. People dismissed her as just a lonely old neighbor, but it was her kindness and persistence that brought light into the darkest moment. She reminded me that sometimes the greatest heroes are not the loudest or the strongest, but the ones who simply refuse to look away. Looking back now, years later, I realize my story carries lessons not just for me, but for anyone willing to listen. Lesson 1. The truth is always worth fighting for. For so long, I thought my words meant nothing. I was a child, and Marcus was the beloved coach, the man with the perfect smile. Every time I tried to speak, I was silenced. But Ethan taught me that silence is exactly what abusers rely on. Speaking up is terrifying, and sometimes people won't believe you at first, but the truth has a power that lies cannot bury forever. Lesson 2. Strangers can become family. Blood doesn't define who protects you, who loves you, or who shows up when your world collapses. Ethan was a neighbor, Mrs. Helen was just someone down the street, and the Fosters were strangers before they opened their home. Yet they became my family. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. Lesson 3. Kindness changes everything. It may sound small, but kindness saved me. Mrs. Helen didn't have to care. She could have ignored the shouts, the bruises, the tension. But her decision to act and to connect me with her daughter Clara changed the course of my life. Never underestimate what one small act of compassion can do. Lesson 4. Pain can turn into strength. I will never erase what happened to me. The nights of fear, the betrayals, the disbelief, they are part of me. But they are not the end of me. Pain, when faced with courage, can become fuel. Today, I stand not only as a survivor, but also as someone who advocates for children like I once was. Strength is not born in comfort, it's forged in fire. Lesson 5. Always listen to children. This is perhaps the most important of all. Children rarely invent stories about pain. If a child finds the courage to speak, it means they have already carried more than they should. Believe them. Protect them. Their safety matters more than the reputation of any adult. Now I live a life I once thought impossible. I study, I laugh, I dream. Ethan raises his daughters with the gentleness he was once denied, and the Fosters remind me every day that love can be steady and quiet. Together, we are proof that brokenness does not have to be the final word. I share my story not because it is easy to tell, but because I know there are still children out there whose voices are dismissed, whose truths are buried under polished lies. If even one person hears this and chooses to listen, chooses to act, then the pain of remembering is worth it. So if you're reading this now, I ask you to carry these lessons with you. Speak the truth. Value kindness. Protect children. And never doubt the power of a stranger's hand reaching into the dark. If my story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard, and together we can make sure no child's truth is silenced again.